Today we have the great pleasure of speaking with Jeanette Spires. And Jeanette, we met, it's over 10 years. It's at least a dozen years ago now.
Easily.
Yeah. And so we've done one whole circuit around the zodiac. And I want you to start by telling us who you are and what you do. And then we'll go back and look at the forces that shaped you in the course of your life.
All right. Well, I am an educational consultant. I work with primarily students from the age of 16 to 28 in helping them find their strengths. Sometimes it's a very high functioning person who's got too many options, trying to narrow down their lives, might be grad school, might be something like that. On the other end are the students who are lost, floundering, grew up in dysfunctional homes, whatever, and need to put their lives together. And there has arisen in the last 20-year period quite a large young adult treatment world that is not a hospital. And so that causes me to be away from home, maybe normally 50 days a year, visiting places, looking at options, visiting my students who might be ready to transition somewhere. I am a nationally certified school psychologist. I've worked on 3 continents, India, Argentina, and the United States, in schools doing college counseling. So I do a lot of college work. So that's who I am.
What fun. It sounds, so how did you get into this? Let's go back and look at your early childhood, your upbringing, and tell us a bit about how you grew up and where and what your family was like and how that shaped you.
Okay. Yeah, very much shaped by my family. I was raised by 2 parents who were married to each other, who were both musicians, who were very smart people, but depression babies. I think they both graduated from high school in the early 30s, which put them smack in the middle of a depression. I believe when my father and mother got married, I think my father was building roads for $1 a day. Well, $1 bought something then. My mother had gone to business college, so was working in a loan company. She was very, very smart, and so was my father. My father was one of 12 children.
Wow.
Who had moved to Illinois from Virginia because my grandmother had a sister in Illinois, and they were all on their way to Oregon at the time when Oregon was the next place for people to go, especially out of Appalachia. It was just being settled. And but my grandmother stopped in Illinois and said, "This is as far as I go. It's too far from I don't have anything to rest my eyes against, and I need to be able to go back to Virginia now and then." So, so the prairie, she just wasn't going to cross any more prairie. And she kind of ruled the roost. She was herself. Her father died. She was put out with a family at 6.
Oh, wow.
And treated like somebody who was not part of the family. She didn't go to school. And she was born, my grandfather, if you could believe it, was born in 1867. And my own great-grandfather was fought at Gettysburg on the southern side while his brothers fought on the northern side.
Wow. We have the same thing in our family with people on both sides.
On both sides, for whatever reason. And so my family history goes way back to, also on my father's side, a fellow named Michael Widener, who was the translator with the Hessians at Cornwallis for George Washington.
Oh my. So how did this shape you? You must have had a deep sense of history and a sense of being part of an American experiment from early.
Exactly. And my grandmother didn't believe in doctors. She made all her own medicines. They knew the forest. My grandfather made his living by digging up roots and leaves and sending them to Squibb or something for medicines, pollens from the trees and so forth. So we have a tradition of working for ourselves in my family. That's what we noticed, that none of us likes a boss. People are always out of my father's world, always worked for themselves, entrepreneurial. Nobody wanted a boss. And I'm the same way. I tend to be kind of critical of any system I worked in. I worked at, in a junior high. I worked at Penn State, where I was very happy. It's where I got my master's in counseling. I was very happy there. Then I married my husband, who is a West Point graduate and from Arkansas, same kind of earthy family background. So we shared a lot of understanding about our grandparents and how hard their lives were, but how they were happy and did it and worked hard. So we tend to like to work for ourselves. So I'm very independent. And about 40 years ago, I had a last child, and I found I couldn't put her into daycare as other teachers and counselors might have been doing. I couldn't do it. So I quit my job.
What was the reasoning?
For myself.
What
was that reason?
Yeah, what was the reasoning for not putting her?
I didn't want somebody else to teach my daughter what was yes and what was no.
Great. Got it.
And I never regretted that, because then I just had enough of a reputation I gave a talk at 3 libraries and I had a business right away. So,
that's super. What was the talk on at the libraries?
I think I gave a series on how to get into competitive colleges, which brought enough paying people because I was in a fairly affluent set of suburbs near Chicago.
Okay.
And so people showed up, and suddenly I had more work than I knew what to do with.
And was that working with young people to prepare?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it was really starting with boarding schools and colleges. I'd really learned about boarding schools by being in India and Argentina, where kids came and went from the American high schools to various boarding schools as their parents would be transferred or whatever. So that was a new world to me, but I learned that, you read the books and you say, I'll talk to you tomorrow about this. You run home, read the book, and you come back and you have
Good for you. Yeah, I've been there, done that too.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I'm glad I can read. Yeah.
So how would you say that you kind of came into the work you're doing now in this sort of morphed gradually into seeing situations that young people found themselves in?
Yeah, therapeutic placements. That's what I do the most of now. Although I keep my hand in. This year I took on 10 students who were high school, college-bound kids, because I know that world and I also want to keep up with it. So I just took a small number, whereas I used to maybe have 60. I just limit myself to 10, and it's quite enough, and it keeps me happily in that world. And then the rest of my clients are maybe failed in college, didn't go at all, got in trouble, hospitalized, suicidal, whatever.
Oh,
we
wow.
have a pretty, our culture has changed very drastically for teenagers. Imagine today is the TikTok day when you're supposed to damage your high school.
When you're supposed to what?
There's a TikTok, December 17th was the day that TikTok said you're supposed to do some damage in your school.
What do you mean, damage?
Yeah, well, look it up. I mean, so yesterday, 2 loaded guns were found here at Evanston High School. I would have kept my kids home today if I were a parent. We have things like that are worldwide and very frightening.
What is the impulse behind this? What do you see as the reason for why we have, or the reasons for why we have all of this craziness?
I think that the need for connection is extremely strong, and they're finding artificial connection. I see it with my granddaughters who would disappear and open their hearts to anybody they meet online. They don't have the boundaries. They don't understand that you can't trust things, and they get very incensed if you say, that may not even be somebody your age that you're talking to.
Right.
There's this very strong need for connection, and with COVID, it has made it just spiral downward in terms of what developmental tasks these kids can go through. They're really missing things that we would learn in bumping up against each other.
Huh.
And so now we have a series of sort of immature students, and they're having trouble when they get to college, and then they're put in their room in quarantine, and they're paid $50,000 to go to this place, and they're just getting hybrid Zoom lessons. That's what last year was about. And so I got more people who kind of said, whoa, this isn't college for me. What can I be doing instead under these conditions? And so it's been a very, very tough time. And I don't have those answers either. You know, we can kind of stumble around. I'm part of groups of counselors. We help one another, thank goodness. But no, it's an unusual time. This is just an unusual time. We're going to get through it as a world. But the very fact that it could do damage to your high school day is just unconscionable.
That's amazing. I had not heard of that. That's just startling, actually. So, are you finding in the population of young people that the whole idea of, say, random acts of violence or just not thinking to be kind and considerate, that whole thing is shifted, or is
I don't think it's any different in a way than what teenagers, say at the age of 15 at Halloween, would take an outdoor toilet and put it on top of the grocery store. Okay, those were acting out in something like kind of scary to do, but they were pretty harmless.
Yeah.
So there is obviously that lack of frontal lobes in our teenagers, which causes them to do some dumb things and to be mean to one another. The mean girls alone, I don't think that's ever gone away. My guess is that there were mean girls. Some kind of primal sorting out was going on when they went to the well.
When they went to the what?
When they went to the well for water, thousands of years ago.
I see. You're talking about just that in past times when people went to the well, there was some kind of a pecking order or something.
I bet there were mean girls then, because it seems to be universal.
Why do you think that is?
It may be a way of survival of the fittest. I don't know. I mean, don't ask me that. I'm not. I don't have an answer for that. But I do think it's that we do have these patterns that reappear, and that's why the boys drive chicken. Isn't that survival of the fittest?
I'm sorry, it froze up just then. Can you say that one more time?
You're freezing.
Yeah,
you're freezing too. I said, remember when kids used to get in their car and drive chicken? Do you remember that? They go toward one another to see who turns off first instead of crashing.
I'm sorry, so what was the game? Quote unquote quote game?
Chicken. It was called chicken. They did it with cars.
Okay, and that was what you said, racing. You kind of froze. Can you describe what the game of chicken was about?
You're freezing too.
Okay,
Uh,
I just closed out some things. Let's see if it improves. And if it doesn't, what we're going to do is we'll close out and come back on, and then we'll just edit it together.
Okay.
Okay.
Keep turning off one video, then the quality gets better.
Can't do that. Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you all right.
Okay, I think it's better now. I closed a couple of things and I think it's better.
Yeah, you're buffering a little. Yeah.
Okay, so start again and say, tell me about the game. Tell me about the game of chicken. I'm not sure we ever played that.
Oh, well, you probably didn't play it, but the boys used to play it. They would, we could drive cars at 15 years old, all right? So they would go to a country road and go toward one another and see which one veered off first.
Oh my. And so
Mm-hmm.
the trick was to be the last person to veer off, except that you might disengage it. Yeah.
Yeah, just look it up. It's a pretty universal game.
Okay. So is this kind of a one-upmanship thing, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Who's the strongest, bravest guy?
Yeah, yeah. What my younger brother calls a chimp show.
Probably, yeah.
Which chimp is bigger, badder, and meaner than the other one?
That's right.
Yeah. So that seems to me that has to do with a lack of what you pointed to earlier, a lack of connectedness.
Right.
Where you don't really.
A teenager doesn't have all their brain power.
Okay.
And so I look at, hunting and gathering is still there. So what I see is kids who are developmentally, for example, a 14-year-old still blames the system for anything that goes wrong in their lives.
His system.
They blame the system. The teacher doesn't like
system.
And that's a 14-year-old, fairly normal trait. They're freshmen in high school or eighth graders. The teacher doesn't like me. Why didn't you do your work? Well, nobody reminded me. My mother nags me, so I don't want to do it when she does that. It's all blaming the outside. Now I'm finding 17 and 18-year-olds who haven't gotten through that phase.
Oh, wow. So
blaming the system. They're still blaming the system.
Not taking personal responsibility. Okay.
They're not taking ownership.
Mm-hmm.
And,
when you work with them to help them understand that when they take ownership of everything that shows up in their lives, when they take ownership of it, that then they have more power to do something about it. How do you go about working with them to explain that or to tease it out of them? What's your approach?
What I have to try to tease out is their desire to change. Okay. And I'm not going to be the change agent because usually if we have somebody who's like failing in school and self-harming or whatever, threatening suicide, the places where the research says they do best is to get them out into nature in a wilderness program. And the sad part of this is insurance will pay for hospitalization, where you're confined to a room and you may watch some videos and do some worksheets. But out in the woods, when you have to cook your own dinner, there's learning. And we know that nature is healing. So there's very good, about 80% positive outcomes from students who go to regular wilderness programs. Insurance is finally waking up slightly in that there's a wilderness treatment number now for insurance, which there never used to be.
How long ago was that?
Process.
What?
It's a slow process to get insurance companies to recognize that this is a better experience to pay $500 a day for a wilderness program versus $1,500 for a day in the hospital, which yields next to nothing. And so that whole world is the one I live in, is getting outdoors and then into appropriate school setting that will provide peer support. We know that peer support is critical. These are lonely children.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of lonely children who feel unconnected, and then they're vulnerable to social media.
When you say lonely children, is that because of things like TV, both parents working? What are some of the dynamics that create lonely children?
I think a lot of it is the social media influencers, the Kardashians, whatever it is, that I don't measure up.
Oh,
I have more kids who are reporting that they can't sleep because they don't like some feature on their body. They don't like their nose. And one girl say something about one of her toes. You know, they're not perfect and they don't know what to do about that. Those are the kinds of things that get handled much better in a group peer setting where they're sharing each other's stuff and they begin to see they can quickly criticize another people's thought and then recognize, oh, I think the same thing. We're both really a little bit off here.
Yeah. Now, when you are working with young people now, are you doing this by Zoom or is it in person or how are you doing it now?
Well, I see people from different parts of the country. So sometimes it's by Zoom. Ideally, for all my local people, I really try to see them in person. It's been, it was harder. Now it's a little easier. We've got our boosters and so forth. So if I can see them in person once in 3 dimensions, I've worked so long that there is a certain intuition that steps in that helps me know that person somewhat. But I'm often may see them once, but I want them to know who I am because I'm going to become part of their lives. If they've agreed they need help and they need to go somewhere, and we talk about what those places could be like. There are kids who threaten their parents and say, no, I'm not going to talk to anybody about this. I'm not going. If I go somewhere, I'll kill myself and then you'll always be sorry. Those are all lines we hear all the time. Matching them to the right therapist, the right peer group is something we have to do with, like, putting a query letter together with the parents' help, sending that off to who I think we may want to tickle to see if they've got a group of people that are like this child. Because you don't put somebody who's been stealing cars in a group with 6 kids who are worrying about their adoptions. That wouldn't be useful. It would be a waste of money. So other than understanding one another a little better, that wouldn't be treatment. So it's a very difficult job. Sometimes I go, this is the hardest job I could have imagined ever having. And I have colleagues that I can always confer with. I have 2 right here in the Chicago area. When people come to town to tell us about their programs, we all 3 will meet with them at the same time so we can kind of ask our questions and get a feeling. And I travel and go look at things. So I was just in Asheville. There's a lot of stuff around Asheville.
Like what kinds of things are you looking at?
I'm looking at the quality of the staff, the physical setup,
This is for programs that you're going to recommend?
Programs.
Okay.
The treatment programs. What are the students standing up straight and looking each other in the eye and laughing? Or are they all, I once saw some kids getting on a bus, and this was in Texas, getting on a bus to go on a group field trip. Everybody with their head forward, making their way slowly to the bus. I thought, what a terrible place this must be. You know, there was no relationship, no talking to anybody else in the line, nothing. And I once had to give a program at a school where the new ownership of the school sent me there to do kind of a hokum workshop with the counselors. And as I was getting ready to present my stuff, the people that worked there were gathering, and nobody talked to anybody else. Now, if you're working in a place where you're all collaborating to help these girls, it was a girls' program, they didn't have any relationship with one another. These were the therapists. They were like, and their head woman that was in charge of it sat off to one side, and they all acted as if nobody liked anybody else. It was the strangest talk I ever gave, but then that was what I was able to go back and report to the new owners. That it didn't seem to be any camaraderie there.
Do
the leadership.
Do they bring you in then to help correct that sometimes?
No. I just give them that wouldn't be my job. Okay. My job is to work for my clients.
Okay.
Not to help them run their program. I'll give them feedback, but that's their problem then.
Okay. Huh. Interesting. So can you give us an example of, say, a real success story that you had? Someone who comes to mind where they came in with major problems and you helped them and kind of find more their purpose in life, or something that really ignited their soul, so the person's soul, so that they then became a very, very different person and went forward. And
yeah, actually, well, this is an unusual story. It's the first one that I could have thought about that before, but the one that is maybe most recent, and that is 17, 20, is 11 years that I worked with this family. It's an amazingly worldwide wealthy family who hired me for, they're from another country. I don't dare identify anything.
That's okay, yeah.
And they lived in our area and just hired me for college help to find an engineering school for their son. So he was following, family said, you have to be an engineer. We are an engineering company. You have to work for our company. And so this very nice boy, very polite, very sort of always standing up straight, perfect manners, always incredibly excellent manners, okay, European family. So he and I worked on sending him off to an engineering school, which he got into. He got there and was completely out of place. He was miserable and he kept trying harder. He joined a fraternity, but he didn't seem to know. He put all that first and put his academics last as he kept trying to figure out how to relate to these other kids. His upbringing was so different. This is a kid who could decide to fly to Switzerland because he wanted to ski. That's how rich they are. So, and so that was his life. And that's sort of, he wasn't identifying with regular people. And he was just the sweetest, most wonderful person. So, okay, he comes back home and goes to a local college here just to try to find and to figure out, okay, he's not an engineer anymore. So let's just go to college locally. So he signed up. I wasn't in on his deciding to go locally, but we have a lot of local colleges in the Chicago area. So he goes there. He starts playing a video game called EVE Online, which I have learned later with college students can take them right out of school, because he showed up here with his mother, psychotic. He'd been awake for 60 hours on EVE Online because it's some kind of a leadership game where he had a bunch of people follow. He had made his way up the leadership role. And if he made a mistake in whatever goes on in EVE Online, he would knock out all his Romanian followers. And he felt they have to then go to the bottom, and it's his fault. So he said, I kept making mistakes. Here's a kid with his eyes glazed over. He hasn't slept. His mother brings him in. And I said, okay, we have to get him to Wilderness. I'm not putting this kid in the hospital. And so he goes willingly because we sent him to Hawaii. He planted pineapples. He did a lot of group stuff with his age group. He healed up from the terrible psychotic state he got into from the video game. That got taken care of. He agreed he needed to be in a young adult program, so he went to a young adult community out west. Then he's starting to learn to deal with like American people his age, because he was really brought up in a very sort of industrial royalty world. And they still go to clusters or something, really. And so he goes now here he's still a college student. We're into third year, maybe. He goes to this place in Oregon and lives with other kids. And he suddenly notifies everybody that he would like to live as a homeless person for a while. And in the town he was in, there was a pretty good homeless shelter. And he decided he wanted to be homeless. Well, they called his mother, who was in Switzerland at the time, and she said, no, absolutely not. I don't want him trying to be homeless. But he was giving us a message. I don't know where I fit. And so we worked through that, and he got himself sort of successfully through there, and we looked for a new college for him. Where can he find himself? And we decided on a college in Canada that allows you to work with this very tiny faculty to design your own program. It turned out, while he was in Oregon, he took a course in graphic design and video work and turned out to be creating some of the most original designs in almost 3 dimensions from his class. That class changed his life. So when he went to the Canadian college that let him design his own program, he did a design major, as opposed to the engineering he was supposed to be tracked into. It takes him 8 years in the end from the time he started college till he graduated. And he comes back to me 2 years ago then, just before COVID, and the year before, I think. And he said, I want to become an architect, because he learned that much from his design work. But he wanted to become an architect for housing, for the downtrodden, for low-income housing, for creating that world for people. So he had gotten his altruism, which he's, because of his wealth, always hangs over there. Why am I the rich guy? So we set about to have him apply to architecture schools with absolutely no experience whatsoever in architecture. None. All he'd done was he did design a bench for a company in his home country, which he had a picture of, and it was unique. So we go through, we spent hours and hours and hours on his graduate school applications, which were different at every school. He gets into some of the top architecture schools in America, doesn't get into Harvard. He went out and looked at it and said he'd love to go there, but they didn't take him. He gets a letter from Cornell University saying, "We loved your portfolio. However, you have no architecture experience. If you would come here next summer for our Intro to Architecture program and apply the following fall for the next year, we'll give you a scholarship to come here."
Oh my.
And this time, Michigan had already offered him a scholarship, and they're a high-ranked place. He's actually in a famous architecture school. He's an A student. This year, he is a mentor to new students. He's had a New York City internship already. They want him next year. He's found his world, and he, as they say, we all think one way and you think another way. And what I feel we had here was a boy, and his grandfather was a famous inventor that made the family fortune. It took his brain till he was 27 years old to be really integrated, and he turned into a genius. And all of that was there, but it was happening in developmental order. I mean, he wanted to be homeless for a while. Think about it. It's the most interesting case I ever had.
Yeah, no, what an amazing story. So you really helped him just in terms of sort of like guiding him in different ways, to different programs, different experiences, to have great latitude in finding his purpose, finding the thing that lit him up, that gave him joy, that gave him a sense of meaning and purpose in life.
That's right. And the sad part of this is they could afford it.
Yeah.
And other people can't. So I see people who can, and then that's when I have to try to figure out what can we do for this family. So that becomes really hard, but it's not impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess you've probably gotten very creative and have built a major network of colleagues as you've been doing this.
Yeah, that's right. I do. I have this small group that's a national group, and they're helpful. I can say to somebody, "Oh, what do I do about this?" And if nobody else knows, then we have to just try to figure it out. Yeah. But it is, I don't like bosses. That's the truth. Nobody in my family likes a boss.
Yeah, figure God's my boss.
Yeah, that's exactly it. What do they say? Let go and let God.
Yeah, let go and let God, right. So you mentioned when we were talking or communicating before this interview that you have run into a very interesting problem in fairly recent times. I'm not quite sure how far back this goes, with the young people being really impacted by the chemicals that they're ingesting, for example, the plastics that mimic estrogen. Okay. And you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'll talk about that. And I also want to talk about the cannabis problem with growing brains. Okay. But what have we got? We've got more autism, in which they are tying to a couple things, possibly. One, the PBAs, the plastics. The other, they say 15% of autism is coming from induced births, which can mean if you give somebody a stimulant to get through the birth process, there could be an oxygen loss if it's rushing the contractions, and the babies may be born with a little oxygen loss. And I am seeing more young people, it's usually males, who may be more vulnerable, where they say there was some oxygen loss at birth and this kid has an 85 IQ in a bright family. And so who knows what, I mean, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a scientist, so I just read stuff, okay? But I know what I see.
Yeah.
And I see more students who, I mean, there are more colleges now that have risen up for students with real learning issues. And the whole college is that way. So,
Wow.
and so, yeah, there are quite a few changes. We also, I think social media has done a lot, especially the girls seem to have more identity problems, more saying they don't like their nose anymore or whatever.
I'm not perfect.
I'm not perfect. Yeah, and that's a shame. I mean, it's just a shame. We were all not perfect too, but we all pointed out other people that weren't perfect while we hoped we weren't too bad. But and then I'm greatly impacted by the early cannabis use and the vaping, the fact that the media can't get straight what there is so much good medical studies in terms of what cannabis is doing. And I really want to talk about that because there, in 2012, the Duke and New Zealand study came out showing, and it was longitudinal, and think about what weak cannabis that was in those days for a longitudinal study that was reported in 2012. Duke and New Zealand, the universities there cooperated, that people using cannabis from like early teenage gave up 8 IQ points, period.
How much?
8, which is half a standard deviation. Well, that 8 points, who doesn't want their extra 8 points back, but they don't get it back. And then, so we would go along with having that information for parents. But then in 2019, these doctors wrote a letter to the New York Times because of the legalization of cannabis, which I agree, medically, it's a wonderful thing. Who knows all the things that are going to be able to happen with adults in this use. But this letter that was written that the New York Times printed from a couple of doctors in New York that I give parents brought 1,600 responses from people said, yes, that happened to me. My brain doesn't work right anymore, whatever it was.
So it's specifically with young people, starting about what age are you seeing where they're
14, 13, 8th grade with the disaffected kids. They start to feel better. I was an unhappy kid. Now suddenly this makes me feel a little better. Okay, this is going to be my thing. And the problem is this letter from 2019, I recommend to everybody. Doctors Davis and Creek, Kreek, was in the New York Times. I give it to parents, they gave, oh my gosh, because they are saying the legal age, whereas now it is, 21 in Colorado, it's 19 in Canada, they're saying it should be 25. After 25, adults can use marijuana, but their brains are formed. So if they want to feel better or giggle or whatever, they can do that. But we have a place here in Evanston, Illinois for young adult treatment, and it's cutting edge. It's called Yellow Brick. And the owner, who's a psychiatrist named Jesse Viner, gives a wonderful talk about what is going on between like 16 and 24 in the brain. He said, if you think of the interstate highway system and think of your map that you have in your atlas, I still have an atlas, of what the interstate highway looks like. What you're doing in your brain, because you have way too many brain cells, you're pruning out what you don't need. So if you were a hunter-gatherer, you went out with the man at 13 and you learned how to hunt and gather. And what you didn't need, your brain gave up. So what's happening now, he said, you're supposed to be forming your strengths. at this age. You're building, reinforcing from your learning your interstate highway system to make your brain function smoothly. Now, the THC in pot interferes with myelinization of brain tissue, meaning you could be trying to go to Kansas City and the bridge is up. I thought his using the interstates as a metaphor was really a good idea. You're just going to have some pockets in your brain that don't work as well because you interfered with a certain branching. Now, interestingly, ketamine is being shown as something that can encourage and help brain branching in this age group. Used very carefully.
That's surprising. So ketamine properly used and administered and so on, that can actually increase the connection of this.
That's right. Can help the connections. And so add this problem, which I still have parents go, well, I smoke pot. I said, well, yeah, maybe you gave up IQ points. I don't know what else to say to them. But I said, the research is so much better now on why you have to wait if you want to use pot.
Yeah.
And yeah, of course, it's also adding, I mean, I love my CBD oil and put on an ache or something. The other thing is then we have the issue with our food supply, which is estrogenic in a lot of ways. Soybeans, the fertilizers, which cause things to grow and make seeds, and especially, some of our fertilizers. On the other hand, people trying to do organic farming say it is really very, very difficult. And if they need to use manure, that's more animals. So we have this whole animal business versus, what are the best fertilizers? If I go to Europe and I eat the vegetables there, I go, wow, this is what vegetables used to taste like versus our vegetables. Or I can go to Ecuador and eat the vegetables and be very happy.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think we have all this stuff that's so complex. I mean, I lost my husband to Agent Orange. And at that time, can you imagine that Monsanto or whoever made it, I think it was Monsanto, told the government it was safe. Yet we had all kinds of people with Parkinson's, cancers, prostate. I watch his West Point classmates dying off with all these terrible things. And
that was from while he was in Vietnam?
When he was in Vietnam, and he said they told us we could drink the groundwater.
Oh my.
That they would. Who would think in a minute that you could destroy a jungle with a liquid and it wouldn't affect a person? I mean, we're like plants. We need air, water, sunshine.
We take in nutrients. We take in whatever we're ingesting, and then,
that's right. That's right. So anyway, I mean, these are all some of the things I see that make me say, why are these kids a little different from what they were like in 1981 when I started working with this population? And I don't have any answers other than there's a lot of things to straighten out, and it's really complex with the big
and it's really important that we straighten it out. So what I'm hearing you say is your job as a person who works with young people who are having problems, you've identified that this is an area that really needs research and needs some changes made in how we're organizing civilization. And if we're going to create heaven on earth, we need to get serious about finding solutions to the problems that we've created by not focusing on doing things better, by focusing on more money, more material things, more. I'm hearing there's a kind of an embedded thing here that we're maybe focusing too much on the wrong things in life.
Here's what I feel. We have all these issues in different places and there's no gestalt.
Yeah.
there's nothing that shows how these all interact and intertwine, and from induced births to fertilizers. I mean, I just feel like we have. I mean, I feel like, and I'm sure this has been true throughout history. People my age go back to thinking, "Oh my gosh, the world was so much better when life was easier." Yeah, but not for everybody. We're growing as a country, but we're so fractured. I'm afraid the last 6 years or so fractured the country very badly. But it was the cracks were starting to show.
Yeah.
And I don't know. We've always been sort of a model for democracy. If you forget all about what we did to the Native Americans, just forget about
not only Native Americans, but virtually, people, African Americans, people from other countries, the Irish, the Japanese, the Chinese.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, we can't stand that boldly and say we're the model for everybody on earth to how to do things, because we've repeated a lot of the mistakes have been made all over the world for centuries.
Jeanette, you're reminding me, this was such an interesting experience when I came back from living in Japan for 4 years, and I organized a bicycle trip across the United States to rediscover America in taking my time doing so. When I was in Great Bend, Kansas, I just intuitively went into the local electric company. It was a rural electric company. And I asked if the guy who was the head of it, if I could interview him for the book that I was working on about the bicycle trip. And I actually told this story in the book. And when I asked him, I said, well, what can we do to make America, what can we do to make America better? What are your hopes? What are your fears for America? He kind of looked at me as if all of a sudden he was seeing me for the first time, right? I'm sitting across his desk he was sitting at his desk, a big desk, and I'm sitting in front of the desk. And he looks at me like he's really seeing me. He's really getting that I'm a real human being, and he really wants to give me a good answer. He gets up without saying a word. He's wearing cowboy boots. He clicks across the wooden floor, closes the door to his office so no one else is going to hear, I assumed, comes clicking back in his cowboy boots, sits down, looks at me, and he says, America is still the best country in the world, but it's getting so the best ain't much to brag about.
Yeah,
that was 1976. It was the bicentennial year, the 200th anniversary of America. And I think we've reached the point now where we really need to stop and take some really serious reassessment of where we are, the indigenous people, the Native Americans and others around the world used to ask themselves periodically, they would say, what kind of people do we want to become? And what kind of community do we want to live in? Do we want to create? And I think we need to do that on a global basis now. That would change everything if we started to really ask, what kind of people do we want to become? Do we want to continue down this road of illness and chronic disease, lowering of IQs because we're doing things in a way that, looks sophisticated, looks, whatever. But in reality, it's really, really harming the babies as they come into this world. Or it's harming people when they're young adults, like the people you're working with. So if you were going to give a message to the world, something that you would really like to see us do, what would it be?
Oh my gosh, I wish I knew. I would start with the food supply. I would try to see what are the natural things that can be put in the soil that don't require more cattle, more sheep, more chickens, whatever. What we took away, we added ownership of land to a country where people roamed territories without boundaries. They had their own boundaries in their own little way, but they kept to them. And that's a worldwide thing. I don't know, but I'll tell you, I used to live in Argentina. Perón printed money. We're printing money. These people have had to live their whole lives with a constant inflation, constantly converting any money they had into worldly goods that they could turn around and sell, whether it's apartments or houses for rent or whatever it was. Constant attempts to create a currency. So now we're printing money to everybody. We don't know. They're saying, why are there so many jobs available that nobody will take? Everybody's got, we're hiring signs, but people used to come. They didn't used to have that many, people don't, and we have almost no young people going into the trades. So our plumbers and electricians are all coming from other countries, well-trained in their wonderful education systems that really turn out an excellent carpenter or whatever it is. If I took one of my 18-year-olds and said, how would you like to go into construction? They look at me like I'm crazy. So that's I could tell you about problems all day. So
the thing is that every problem, I think that if we start to refocus it and say, okay, this is a problem, would you say perhaps that you would call for having a universal conversation about solving these problems? Would that make sense? As a starter, let's raise the questions. That's what we're doing with the summits. And it's so interesting.
Just raise the questions. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Raise the questions.
Yeah, because you raised 2 points, 3 points here, two in particular, though I want to point, three. One is health, that health has declined, intelligence has been declining for some anyway. One is the food supply and agriculture. And then a third one you've mentioned is the money, the whole printing of money in the money system. Interestingly, the next summit that we're going to be doing is probably going to be called Super Health, how to create super health, a super healthy population so that we can create heaven on earth. Mm-hmm. And I've been sort of framing one of the things I'm working on is to declare as a global goal, a national goal and a global goal, the creation of super health in one generation, where super health is the full development, alignment, and integration of the spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical aspects of self. It's like saying humanity on all cylinders. 100%. Buckminster Fuller, when I interviewed him, he talked about 100% effective humanity, a successful humanity. And I thought that was a really neat concept. The idea that if we take that as a goal, that's what kind of people do we want to become? And we set that as a long goal, and then we say, how do we get there? It's like putting the man on the moon. Let's put a man on the moon. We looked up at stars for thousands of years in the moon and said, wow, it'd be cool to go to the moon. And we did it in less than 10 years once it was declared as a national goal. We can do the same. Does that?
Well, people in functional medicine think about it. They're the integrative psychiatrists who are going, whoa, you'd be a lot better off with more zinc.
Yeah.
I think that there's a whole world out there that is developed and shareable if the regular medical schools would step to it. My daughter's a doctor, and actually they have an integrative doctor in their practice. They use medical hypnosis in their practice in her clinic. It's not her clinic, but she's in a clinic. Yeah. And so, they creep in, but it is, when I go to see my doctor for my annual physical, it's not very holistic.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that that's the trick, is that there are a whole lot of people, like many of these students that you've been working with, these young people. You yourself, you said, I don't like to have a boss, you know. And I think there are more and more of us. I mean, I retired when I was 25 to do what made absolute sense to me for the rest of my life, because that was the only thing I knew would make me really, really happy, is to do things that made sense to me. And I think that in terms of finding and fulfilling our life purpose, there's something there when in getting to know yourself, getting to know what you love to do and to how you want to be, and then to have a collective shared goal that's just a general direction to aim in, that maybe we can get there a whole lot better than we're doing now. And those of us who are of like mind, we come together, we have the conversation. That's why we're doing the summits. We're gathering the voices. And that was the job of the women in traditional societies, in the indigenous societies. The women gathered the voices. The women selected the chiefs. The women pulled the chiefs down. The women said, we're going to war. The women said, we're making peace. And so that got dropped out of the U.S. Constitution. I think you'll enjoy going back and listening to some of the summits we've done so far, because they're really interesting conversations with very, very insightful people. And we're going to be starting to layer in some other things to make them even, more exciting. So, is there anything else that you'd like to add here? And because this is really great. I think you're doing some amazing work.
I can't think of anything else. We've gone far afield with this sort of it. I'm always looking for a gestalt. I just want things to harmonize. My parents were musicians, everything. I like everything to come out on a good chord.
Yeah. So what would be a good chord to end on?
Well, when I wrote a book in 2003, and the smartest guy in it is an Amish farmer who does natural farming. And his advice was that you should about once a month read the whole book of Proverbs.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, that was his advice. He was the smartest guy in my whole book.
What was the title of your book? Can you tell us just a little bit about it?
It was called What Do You Know? Wisdom for the Road Ahead. And it was designed for 18-year-olds. So I got 53 people to tell me what they wish they had known when they were 18.
What a lovely thing to do. Now, is that still in print? Is it available?
No, it's out of print. My publisher actually had a heart attack, sold the company, and the new people did not understand my book. So we sold out an edition. I have about 10 copies left myself. And every now and then I pick it up and I go, this is a darn good book.
Why don't you put it on, digitize it and get it out there as an ebook?
I could do that. It doesn't include it, because if it was 2003, there is nothing on the whole internet, it's set for that time. So it's really good though. I mean, it's universal truth.
Well, that's it. When you're dealing with universal truth, that doesn't age. And, you could perhaps do a new introduction.
Yeah, well, I have it. I got the rights from the guys who then took over. I'd
love to look at it and maybe give you some feedback. And that sounds like
I can send you a copy. Send me your actual physical address. I'll just
I have to figure out how to do that because we haven't been getting things mailed here. But let me see if I can. I'll figure it out.
Never mind. Okay. Well, I have it on somewhere in the basement or in my storage area. I have all of it. So anyway.
Do you have it in PDF form or in a manuscript? Yeah. Okay, if you could send me that would be the best.
I'll see if I can do it. I haven't even ever tried that. Okay.
Let's play together.
Okay, great. All right. Well,
thank you so much. This was great.
Love you very much.
Love you very much too, Jeanette. Bye-bye.